Well, it's
They've
true.
got the old mailboxes on that.
Hmm.
I wonder if we could put the flowers in the mailbox.
Well, as long as it can be in their paper box. Maybe that was a new strategy Sean was trying to get y'all to move down here. It is a little. I've got one right over the top of me. But you all just light it up tonight. You know, I was coming out Ridge Road on my way to church, and I was getting right towards the Montvale side, and I'm pretty sure there was a little baby owl sitting in the middle of the road. I don't know who he was waiting on. Sorry.
You didn't start moving.
Sorry. Anybody tuning in online has already clicked off and went somewhere.
That sounded like a walk.
Mm. The blue light. Oh, really? Hmm. Well, I thought that was the playground right there. How could?
But you see the light. Here.
Yeah, I can see it flashing. Just having all kinds of entertainment tonight, aren't we? Does anybody remember what their homework was from a couple of weeks ago? Where are your kids? Did anybody, kind of pop quiz, I guess, if you want to answer, or just if you don't, just say no, tell me. Did anybody figure out from reading Psalm 48 why I came up with that question? Just out of curiosity. Anybody? Well, right towards the end, verse 13, there's 14 verses in Psalm 48. The second part of verse 13 says that you may tell it to the generation following. So, as I was studying, of course, you remember where that comes from. Where are your children, right? Public service announcement ran back in the 60s for a 20-year period, ran from the 60s to the 80s. Be sitting there watching TV at 10 o'clock at night, 11 o'clock at night, whatever. It'd just come on and say, it's 10 o'clock. Where are your kids? It's 11 o'clock. Where are your children? Just a little thing they put out there like, okay, hey, do you know where your kids are at? Are they safe? So, and the reason I'm connecting that with this is because it helps us to think, and not that to say that you all, not insinuating anybody's raised their kids wrong or done anything wrong or whatever, but there's some things in this psalm, which is a song. Okay, they're songs; they're meant to be sung. But as we read these and we study these, can you imagine how hard it was to sing some of these songs? And it's hard to get in your head even what kind of tune it would take to sing it. But they were singing these; they weren't just saying things. And so this one's a celebration song. It's a celebration for victory. And so it's believed to be connected with the ones that have come before it in celebrating a victory where they've seen a great move of God when it was against, this insurmountable odds. They saw God move in an amazing way. And because of that, they're singing in celebration. And so there's some things as that they sing and characteristics of God and things that they point out that are like have have we communicated these to our kids? Have our kids, and most, I guess all of our kids now are grown, right? All of us have adult kids. None of us have little ones. Some of us still teach little kids, though, right? Or have taught them. And so are they hearing these things about God? Because they're very important. If they're singing them in celebration, then they should be characteristics and things that our kids have heard about God. And they should even hear them into their adult years, right? I mean, you kind of transition in your parenting, don't you, to kind of just different parenting styles. So you get, as you get later on, you get hopefully more into the friendship stage, but they should still be hearing these things about God. So that's the question of why do you know where your kids are? Where are they at right now? Where are they at in their walk with the Lord? Sometimes they're not, right? Sometimes they're not where you want them to be, or not how you raised them to be, right? And you're thinking, man, did I do anything wrong? Does it mean you've done something wrong if you have a wayward child right now? Not necessarily, no, right? I mean, sometimes it's just the reality of the world and the temptations that are there. So it doesn't mean that you've necessarily done anything wrong. But where are our kids today? And a lot of times in church, for you all, you're probably saying, where are our kids on Wednesday night, right? Where are your adult kids on Wednesday night? Are they in church? Well, that's good. So, and we know Andy's in church on Wednesday night because that's Samuel's playing in the band for the men's ball game right now. Yeah. So where are our kids? So this is entitled Mine, the Glory of God in Zion. So the other thing it's going to be talking about too is the aspect of Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, because in the days of the Bible, where was the presence of God, the focus of God, and the hand of God? In Jerusalem, right? It was there. Cities were key in the days of the Bible. Now, I would think everybody here is a country boy or girl, right? Can I get an amen? Judy, you're a city girl? You would rather live in the city? Well, okay, so she's going to say she needs to repent tonight. She's a city girl. I am not a city boy, okay? Well, I mean, I live in the city now. I said I'd never live in the city, but you know how that goes when you tell God, hey, I'm never going to live in the city. But I do. But most of us, we're like, I don't want the big city. I don't want Knoxville. And we don't like the fact that Maryville is becoming mini Knoxville, right? I mean, we don't like it at all. We want it to stay Mayberry. But here's the thing about this: the significance of cities, and in some areas it's still the same, but especially in the days of the Bible, where were you the safest? In a city. That's where you had the walls of a city, right? That's where you had the gates of the city. That's where you had all of your armies. That's where you had all your protection. That's where, and if you lived out in the landscape and out in the country, you were pretty much on your own. There was no protection there. And so when they talk about it from the standpoint of celebrating the city, not just because it's the city of God and it is Jerusalem, and yeah, that's a big reason to celebrate, but you also have to think of it as because, hey, this was the safe place. Of course, now, having breakfast with Stephen Dees this morning from True Purpose, and we were kind of talking about heaven a little bit, and you know what's it going to be like, you know, because it talks about a new what? A new Jerusalem, right? A new heaven and a new earth, and a new city. And so, have you thought about what heaven life is going to be like? And you know, or we just going to? It's just going to be one big long church service all day long, 24/7. Yeah, so is it going to go back to garden lifestyle? You know, is it going to go back to perfect garden life? And what are we going to be doing? We're going to be worshiping all the time, or we're going to be doing, I mean, I don't know. And we don't need to, you know, we could spend days debating that. But what's it going to be like? What is it? How's it going to be? So, we'll break this down in just kind of little segments and little chunks and look at it and look at the characteristics. Again, begin with the end in mind and that question of what are we passing along to the next generation? The generation that's following, are they hearing these things, again, that they are singing about and that they are celebrating? So, and see if you can pick out some of the things as we're reading them. So it says, "Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in his holy mountain. Beautiful in elevation, the joy of the whole earth is Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great King. God is in her palaces. He is known as her refuge." Now, I'm going to pause right there, and I'm going to tell you the ones. I'm going to tell you some of the characteristics that I've marked that the generation that our kids need to know. First one is great. Great is the Lord. Our kids need to hear, and people need to hear that great is the Lord. Wouldn't you agree? I mean, he's great. And it sounds like a simple word, but what does it mean? What does great mean? If I said, Brenda's meatloaf is really great, what would I be saying? It's really, really, really good. Okay, that doesn't help us. That helps us some. Brenda's meatloaf is really great. It's better than most. It's better than just the normal average, you know, cafeteria meatloaf. It is great meatloaf. It is above normal. It is above average. Of course, then we could complicate the whole issue of what is normal, right? But anyway, that kind of helps us. When we say great is the Lord and greatly to be praised, it's not only just a characteristic, like he is above anything and anybody else. To say he's above average, that doesn't even, he's better than that. And greatly to be praised, which means that there's some okay praise, and then there's some great praise. One of the things that it's hard not to do this, but during the Awake 21, and I don't know if you all watched any of those services or went to any of those services. I hope you caught a glimpse of some of it or whatever. But it was 21 churches, 21 pastors, 21 messages, but also within all those 21 churches, guess what? 21 different music styles. And you know what Gary was doing when Gary was watching them, or when Gary was going to them? Guess what Gary was doing? I was critiquing. Y'all don't do that, do you? Y'all don't critique the music or the message, do you? You're like, it's okay, you know. Hey, man, that was really good. But the different worship styles, the different message styles and music and all of this other kind of stuff. And it was all really good, but there was some that you were like, man, you know, that was pretty good, you know. That was like, they had a home run there, you know, with that. And so we do that, right? We all kind of have this sense of, well, that was okay. That was good. That message was great. or that music was great. So we understand that. But are we communicating that? Again, be careful, because sometimes when we say, man, that music was great, or that message was great, or this was great about whatever, who's that taking the focus off of? It's taking the focus off God and Jesus. And that's where we need to be. But it's hard not to kind of critique sometimes. Great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Glenda, what was it Tony Collins said we suffered from? BRD? Oh, he said, Tony Collins, pastor at Broadway Baptist Church, he said, I figured out that as Baptists we suffer from Baptist rhythm disorder. he said Baptists got in these church services with the Church of God and Pentecostals. He said we didn't know when to clap or what to do. He said we're all confused. But great is the Lord and greatly to be praised. Of course, in the city of our God. They're thinking about the city of God. They're speaking about Jerusalem. But here's another thing that one of the pastors pointed out about. I believe it was Pacer Hepperly, pastor of Rio Revolution. But he said that they had some friends visiting from California during the time that they were in Awake 21. But he said these friends of theirs, he said they're strong Christians. And he said, we've been friends for a long time. But in their visit to Maryville, they said, there is something different about your city. It's not the same back home. In other words, they were saying, we can't remember exactly how he said it, but they were alluding to the fact of we get a different feeling, and I hate to use the word feeling, but we get a different feeling in our spirit being here in your city versus being back home in our city. In other words, they were saying, we sense and feel a Christian presence in your city. Isn't that pretty awesome? I think so. And that's like that's like a hand clap. And so Pacer is like, what can we attribute that to? Obviously a great presence of churches, right, within our community. But he's saying also, we strive predominantly to have Christian leaders in our community, don't we? And elect those. That makes a big difference. And so that's important to know. I thought that was neat. So great is the Lord, greatly to be praised in the city of our God, in his holy mountain. The word holy right there. That's another important aspect and characteristic about God that the next generation needs to be hearing, because that's the standard, right? So we're to be holy as who is holy? God is holy, right? And so we should strive for that. And so people should strive for that. And as I was thinking about the city of our God and his holy mountain, it got me to thinking about what Jesus taught in the Sermon on the Mount about. He said, you are the light of the world. A city that is set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do they light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a lampstand, and it gives light to all who are in the house. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So it's an aspect, it's a characteristic that Jesus ascribed to us as his people, and how we're to let our light shine. Now, the third thing that I highlighted, or I'll put a box around it, is found in verse 2. Beautiful in elevation. Beautiful in elevation. So Jerusalem is in that region, in that area, is on a hill, and it's referred to as Mount Zion. Now, there were two important hills in the Bible. There was Mount Zion, and there was what? There was Mount Carmel. But the other one I'm thinking about is, where did God give them the law? Mount Sinai, right? So there's Mount Sinai. There is Mount Carmel. It does have significance. We got to visit there as well. But this one is specifically being focused on because of its beauty. What do people like about our area? What do people love when they come here? The mountains, right? Oh, we get vacationed here. We just love the mountains. They're just so beautiful. Back home where we're from, we don't have these kind of hills. We don't have this. It's flat. It's this, that, or the other. And when we retire, we're going to move. We're going to move to your little city, and we're going to make it big. But anyway, we welcome anybody watching that's moved here. But beautiful in its elevation. Yeah, there is something beautiful about the mountains. The other thing the other characteristic found there in verse 2 that I've circled is joy. The joy of the whole earth. The joy. Is the next generation, or our kids, hearing about not just the joy of the Lord, but being the joy of being in the Lord's house, the joy of being in the Lord's place, the joy of being in the Lord's presence, the joy of being with the Lord's people? It should be the joy of the whole earth. It should be beautiful. He is beautiful. Place in the presence of God. Excuse me. Again, he's considering the city. He's looking at the landscape, but in looking at the landscape, he's considering the presence of God in this place. The city of the great King. God is in her palaces. He is known as her refuge. So the presence of God, obviously, is significant. But notice there's another characteristic right there. He is known as her refuge. It's known as a safe place. Is the next generation, are people hearing that God is a refuge, a safe place, a sign of power and protection? Is God present? Is God still present with us today? He is, isn't he? Anything that hinders his presence? We've talked about that a little bit, right? We've talked about unity, and we've talked about not being in harmony and not being in fellowship, that it could hinder the presence of God. And we know too that when Christ raptures the church, guess what? Is there still going to be the presence of God here? In-depth little Revelation pop quiz question. Is the presence of God still going to be here? Or is the Spirit of God going to be removed as he removes the church? I know, Pete, right? That's a big, hard, complicated question that people are like, I don't know. Most believe that as we know the power and presence of the Spirit of God right now, if it's alive in us and we're gone, guess what? It's going to be gone. Now, will there still be, man, I don't know how I got to Revelation from this. I did not plan that. But, there still will be the 144,000 witnesses, right, that will still be trying to get people to accept Christ, correct? Yes. So, that as far as his presence with that is concerned, yes, it will be. But as many believe, as far as like the active working power of the Spirit, as far as the church as we know it, that'll be like. So, in other words, to say, when people say, man, it's getting really bad, it is bad, but when the church is gone, it's going to be really evil. So, that power and that safety and knowing his place of refuge will be absent. God is in her palaces. He is known as her refuge. And so then he says, and this was the king's reaction and responses that passed by the city. For behold, the kings assembled, they passed by together, they saw it, and so they marveled. They were troubled, they hastened away. Fear took hold of them there, and pain as of a woman in birth pains, as when you break the ships of Tarshish with an east wind. So, if I said, and I know I'll mess this up, but I tried to listen to how it was said on Google today. But if I said, Vedi, Veni, Vici, anybody know? Vedi, V-E-D-I, Veni, V-I-N-I. I came, I saw, I conquered. Sean's up there like, I know it. I know the answer. Vidi, Veni, Vici. Practice it. Who said it? Roman. It's Julius Caesar. And that was his thing. He said, I came, I saw, I conquered. But now the psalmist is saying these kings, they did what? They came, they saw, they what? They did not conquer. They left with cramps. They were not able to conquer. They were troubled. They hastened away. Fear took hold of them as woman in birth pains and as a ship broken by strong winds. Now, we do know at some periods and points without the history of Jerusalem, they were attacked and they were besieged and their city was destroyed and people were led away captive, right? So there were times and points that had happened. But for the most part, what they're saying is that it's a city that was not able to be conquered. Or is the next generation hearing about the power and protection and refuge and safety of being in the presence of God? So then he says, as we have heard, so not only have we heard stories and have history of what God has done, verse 8, so we have seen, we have witnessed things with our own eyes that God has done. In the city of the Lord of hosts, in the city of our God, God will do what? God will establish it forever. And it made me think back to Psalm 23, verse 6. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord, what? Forever. Being in his presence forever. So then he does a pause right there. So consider that to this point. At the end of verse 8, that word forever, I'd circled it or boxed it because that's an important characteristic that I think the generation and people need to hear about is the eternity of God, that forever. Because the reality is people will exist, people will live forever in one or two places, right? Either with him or without him, either with him in heaven or without him in hell. So then he says in verse 9, we have thought, O Lord, on your loving kindness in the midst of your temple. According to your name, O God, so is your praise to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is full of righteousness. Let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of your judgments. So the other characteristic is the next generation, is our kids, are people hearing about the loving kindness of God. The loving kindness of God. I'd heard about a little clip from a Charles Spurgeon sermon, and Charles Spurgeon has wrote commentaries on the treasuries of David about the Psalms. And he had cited within his sermon, he had cited 3 examples, people. And one person was complaining about a sickness they had. And all they were talking about was this sickness they had. And he was like, yeah, and I know that sickness is a reality, but what about the loving kindness of God? And then he mentioned another gentleman that was talking about how his business was struggling and how business is just not doing good and not really making the money he thought he would make. And he was like, well, yeah, I know maybe your business is seen some hard times, but you've still always had enough to, have food and pay the bills. But what about the loving kindness of God? And then he cited another example of people that were saying, well, yeah, all these people are professing to be Christians, but where are they? Where are they? And what are they doing? And Spurgeon was like, yeah, you talk about those people that profess to be Christians and you don't see them or whatever. He said, but what about the loving kindness of God? Have you thought about that? So all 3 of those sound familiar to things happening in today's time? Are we familiar with sickness lately? Are we familiar with businesses suffering and struggling lately? Are we familiar with people that profess to be Christians, yet they don't show up or serve? Are we familiar with that? So all 3 of those that plagued churches and people back in when was Spurgeon? 1800s? A long time ago? Still today. And so this really should help us think, well, instead of focusing on the faults and failures of people, it's like, think about the loving kindness of God. But notice where he says he gets help in thinking about that in the second part of verse 9. In the midst of where? In the midst of your temple. In the midst of your presence. And so don't just think about it in like, oh, well, I'm at work all the time and I get discouraged and whatever. And then hopefully that when you come here, your thoughts can be refocused and you can leave with a better perspective than how you walked in. Does that make sense? But do we always have to come here to have that perspective changed? No. You can have your own time just right here in his word, right? And have that perspective changed. But it does help when you are with the people of God in the house of God. So, according to your name, O God, verse 10, so is your praise to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is full of righteousness. There's another characteristic that's important for the next generation to know and to hear. The right hand of God is full of righteousness. Let Mount Zion rejoice. Let the daughters of Judah be glad because of your judgments. There's another one that's important too, knowing that God is going to judge and is judging. So then he finishes by saying, just walk around. Walk around the city. Walk about Zion. And go all around her. Count her towers. Mark well her bulwarks, which means just like defensive walls and barriers that are there. Consider her palaces, that you may tell it to the generation following. For this is God, our God, forever and ever. He will be our guide, even to death. And when Jesus commissioned his disciples And he said, all power and authority has been given to me. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. He said what? I am with you always, even to the end of the earth, and to the end of the age. God is with you. God is for you. God is fighting for you. Great things for the generation following to know, to be reminded of. Great things for us to know and be reminded of when we get discouraged and we look around. Great things to communicate. Some praises from Curtis Stombaugh on Inga's condition. He said she was able to be moved out of the COVID